Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Sampson. I serve as the president and CEO here at Science World. Let me start by offering warm thanks to the Culture Saves Lives group for opening tonight's event with a traditional vote.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to follow that beautiful welcome by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. Many thanks to all of you for joining us this evening for an event focused on the opioid crisis. We have an esteemed panel of guests from diverse backgrounds, and I am confident they will lead us through some provoking discussions about this critical issue. Now, a number of people have asked us, why is Science World hosting an event on the overdose epidemic? And it's a great question, and it's one that I am very happy to answer. Science World's been in this spot, actually in this dome, for 30 years, a generation. We've been, throughout that time, engaging children and youth and adults in hands-on science learning. And last year, we embarked on a strategic planning process aimed at answering a single overarching question. In the next generation, what pressing social role should Science World fill? We reached out to our staff, our volunteers, our board, and people all over the community, and in fact, all over the province. In all, over 1,400 individuals across BC answered the call and generously offered their input. And one of the themes that emerged from all that input is a loud and clear signal that Science World needs to address pressing issues at the intersection of science and society. And not just global issues like climate change and species extinction, but issues specific to this place, to this community. We ultimately concluded that Science World should become a community convening hub, a place to bring people together to discuss a diverse range of issues, to engage in dialogue with one another, and to co-create, literally co-create, a thriving future. As one person said, a safe place for dangerous ideas. In late June of last year, we held one of our many downtown community consultation sessions at the Spencer Creo Center on the downtown east side, just a few blocks from here. We were there at the invitation of Ken Spencer, one of Science World's strongest supporters. Joanne Coggin, who's standing over here in the pink shirt, as am I, and I saw two other pink shirts today because it is Pink Shirt Day, to support anti-bullying efforts. You may have noticed all the pink lights on the dome. And on that particular evening, Joanne and a fellow named Patrick Robertson led a group of about 10 people in a discussion about how to build a thriving community. What would it take to build a thriving community right here? And we asked them, how could Science World serve your needs? And what are the most pressing needs that you have? And one of the people at that event is a woman named Tara Taylor. And Tara spoke very eloquently about the community, and in particular, she was really passionate about the opioid crisis issue and the human toll that it is having, not just on the downtown east side, but in communities across this province, as you all know. And the rest of the group agreed unanimously that if Science World were to take on an issue, this should be the one that we would do. So here we are. Tonight's event, Understanding the Overdose Epidemic, represents one of our first forays to transform Science World into a convening hub around issues important to our community. So thank you for joining us. We are honored to host you this evening. And to wrap up, I want to express huge thanks, actually three of them. First, to Tara Taylor herself, who serves as the Manager of Community Engagement for the Spencer Creo Foundation. Next, to Christy Kerr, Executive Director at the BC Centre for Disease Control, and to her team. And finally, to Joanne Coggin, Science World's Director of Community Outreach, and to her team here at Science World. Put simply, this event could not have happened without all of you. After the presentation, please check out tables at the bottom of the ramp on the second floor, where we have some community partners who will be set up to provide you with additional information. But without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's host and moderator, the CEO, Director of Programming, and on-air host of Roundhouse Radio, Don Schaefer.
Thank you very much for the honor and privilege to be here tonight. I was struck by one of the opening comments, which resonates with me. Thank you for coming. Mostly, thank you for caring to come and hear this discussion. I would like to probably repeat some of the thank yous because it's been an honor to have been asked. I'm not sure why yet, but it is an honor to be here and to try and find those beautiful questions that maybe elevate this conversation to a different place. Many thanks to Joanne Cogan, to the Science World Planning Team, Tara Taylor, and Dr. Scott. It's always a pleasure. The BC Centre for Disease Control staff and the BC-CDC Foundation for Public Health, who helped to facilitate this event. An awful lot of work has gone into caring about our community and to bring us all together. Tonight we want to help you better understand drug addiction and the overdose epidemic. We have many groups, experts, and healthcare workers that are here with us tonight to discuss some of the myths around what drug addiction is, who it affects. On our panel tonight, firstly, Dr. Mark Tyndall is with the BC Centre for Disease Control. He's the director of BC Centre for Disease Control and Deputy Health Officer. He's a physician, an epidemiologist, and public health expert. Mark has dedicated his career to studying HIV, poverty, and drug use in multiple places around the world. Mark Tyndall. Mark, where are you? We have Sarah Blythe, who is a former chair of the Vancouver Park Board Commission and founding member of the Overdose Prevention Society. OPS is an organization that has helped inspire many overdose prevention sites across Canada and around the world. Back for a cameo performance, Patrick Smith. Patrick, where are you? Thank you. Patrick is in the founding member of Culture Saves Lives, and we have lots of good questions for you. I'm glad you came. Thank you. Sergeant Michael Wheeler with the Vancouver Police Department. Michael's been a member of the VPD for 16 years. He currently is one of the sergeants in charge of the VPD Organized Crime Section. He spent 6 years patrolling the downtown east side and walking the beat on Commercial Drive. He was previously detective on the drug unit and the homicide unit. And finally, Erica Thompson. Erica, where are you? Okay. Erica is the regional peer coordinator with Fraser Health. She facilitates and promotes the meaningful engagement of people with substance issues. Erica works in developing harm reduction policy and program development implementation within Fraser Health and partner organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel. When we first met on the phone to talk about this issue, we were hoping that we would find a way to elevate the conversation and take it further. But we have to start at the beginning, and I think the best person to help frame what the problem is and how did we get here is Dr. Mark Tyndall. Mark? Great. A microphone? Do I need a mic? A microphone. Oh.
Is that working?
Sounds like.
Okay, great. Thanks, Don, and it's a real privilege to be here and share the stage with people that I really got to know over the last years. Sarah and Patrick and Veronica, Erica, but I don't know Mike until tonight, but I think there's hope for us. We seem to hit it off. But it's the other thing that happened to me today that I did not expect when I came here tonight is that I bumped into Mark Desjardins, who was one of the first people that I treated for HIV in the downtown east side many years ago, and I've done this for 50 or 20 years probably, and a lot of people thank me, a lot of people don't thank me, but when Mark says that you saved my life, actually that's the only person in the world that I think that may be true. So Mark was very ill, and seeing him here healthy and active and engaged is it makes my whole career worthwhile. So thanks. And it really speaks to the fact that the work that we do is not giving up on people, and many of the things we talk about in harm reduction. I'm sorry. We get accused of not allowing people to get on with their lives and get on treatment and get on recovery, but there's just so many examples of people who just need more time, just need another chance, and what we're trying to do is give people another chance. So sorry about that, Don. I kind of threw you off schedule maybe, but
Not at all.
my role here was to kind of lay the background and context of why we're here. I think these kind of events are super important because every time we come up with an idea, the pushback from decision makers and policy makers are that the public's not ready for this, and we can't, no way that we could do this. And I'm always pushing back, well, you really haven't asked them, and we really haven't educated people the way we should. And it's people in this room knowing the issue and advocating for change and new ways of doing things is extremely important. So it's so important that you're here, and you can be real vehicles for change. As people came in, they would have received, I hope, or had the opportunity to receive a handout, and that sort of just gives some context of where we are from an epidemiologic point of view. So it's kind of helpful just to set the stage for many of the other conversations we'll have today. And there's a graph there showing the number of overdoses, and it's just so tragic that we're talking about almost 1,500 people in the province who died last year of an overdose. And when you look at that graph, you also need to know that for every person who died, about 20 people actually overdosed and almost died. So it's a massive problem. The graph below it compares what's gone on with overdose deaths compared to other preventable diseases in the other preventable causes of death in the province, and it outstrips them all by a wide margin. Traffic accident fatalities and homicides and suicides, these things that we're very concerned about, but they're nothing compared to the toll that overdose has taken in the province. The next point would be that this is really affecting communities throughout the province of British Columbia. And though we focus a lot on the downtown east side of Vancouver, the relative death toll across the province is just astronomical, and no community has been left untouched, and has really unmasked the large number of people who are using drugs throughout the province. The next shows the demographics of what's happened, and 80% or 4 out of 5 people died are men. And in an age group from 20 to 49 captures another 80%. So this is a problem of people who, for most part, have used drugs for quite some time, people that are living in poverty, dealing with trauma and mental illness. And this is the focus that we need to continue to have, and really not give up on this group of people who need a lot of our assistance. The other number there is 78% is people who never had the opportunity to call 911. These are people who are found isolated and alone and dead. And so all we try to do to connect with people. We have such a long way to go, and our prohibition and criminalization have, for decades, have driven people underground and trying to avoid being caught with drugs. And this is what we're left with, is a lot of lonely, isolated people using drugs. On the back shows what the toll of fentanyl is, and many people have heard about fentanyl and carfentanil, and basically it's replaced our drug supply. So without the introduction of fentanyl, we'd still be facing 200 to 300 overdose deaths a year, which is tragic in itself. But over 80% of people that are found dead from an overdose have fentanyl in their system. And in the city of Vancouver, it's virtually impossible to find heroin anymore. The whole drug supply has been hijacked by a very potent, synthetic, and cheap compound, and that's what people are dying from. We've highlighted the work done with naloxone. Despite these enormous, massive numbers, a lot of people have been saved by naloxone, and the untold story from those graphics and those numbers is that most of this has been administered by people on the front lines, community workers, and a lot of people in the community who are saving their friends. And we've downloaded a lot of our emergency care on right back to the community. And although a lot of focus and a lot of congratulations should go to first responders and paramedics and firemen who respond to this, a lot of the work on the ground is done by frontline workers who are armed with their naloxone kits. And finally, we have a few definitions of language, and that's another thing. If you go away with one thought from this evening, it's really how we discuss the problem, how we refer to people is so important, and just trying to roll back the stigma that's associated with drug use is so important, and to get away from labels like addicts and junkies and abusers. These are people who have an addiction to drugs and they're using drugs. So we have to use language that treats people with much more respect, and I think that people in the general audience can take that message away is extremely important. So I think this is just to lay some context, and I'll turn it back to Don to ask some more questions.
Thanks, Mark. That's a great place to start. You know, my fear about this panel when we first started putting it together was that we would run out of time very quickly because there's so many questions and it's such a huge issue. The good news is hopefully we're going to get to as many questions as possible. Hopefully we'll take a few from you if you have any. But after the panel is done, we'll all be downstairs and everybody will be available to maybe answer and talk some more. The place I'd like to go to next is with Sarah Blythe. You made a comment recently about having the bravery to say something different. Can you talk about that? Can you go a little deeper on that conversation?
Yeah, so what I was trying to say is that all levels of government have to have the bravery to do something different so that we can start looking at this crisis in a different way and not just the same thing that we've done for over 100 years now. Actually decriminalizing drugs, making drugs available to people is one of the biggest things, is so that people aren't having to use drugs that are toxic and get them off of the street. So that's.
The next question is for you as well, because it was one that I wanted to know is, why did you start OPS?
Well, about a year and a half ago, we were at a street market. I was managing a street market with Ann Livingston and Chris Ewart, and we've got a bunch of our volunteers here today. And we were seeing an increasing amount of people overdosing in the downtown east side, in and around the market that we were holding. So we just decided to get together and do something about it. Because the market was dealing with overdoses every day, all day, every day. People were coming to us off the street asking us for help. So we just put a tent in the back of our market in an alley that was two of the most used for drug use alleys in probably all of Canada. And we set up a tent and we just put some volunteers back there. They had some Narcan and they were aiding people in the alley and in the community. And we've seen up to 700 people a day, but we see about 400, 500 people a day. And we've saved 10,000, or no, we've seen 10,000 people, but we've saved over 500 lives at our site now. So, and we have smoking, yeah. But really, getting to the solution is not just watching people overdose on a toxic drug supply. We really need to move past that. We need to get people proper housing, proper medical care, proper safe access to drugs that will not kill them. And that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Patrick Smith, or Four Bears. It's a real honor to have you with us tonight. And it was inspirational what you did when you started tonight. We're all grateful. I'm curious, what Culture Saves Lives moved away from the Portland Hotel Society. Where are you now?
It's on East Hastings.
Okay.
But no, we're actually housed under MBAC.
Okay.
We really felt it was important for us to, be able to have our own sovereignty and self-determination as First Nations people. And that's really what we see as our strength moving forward.
Can you talk about what's the best way to help First Nations people with this opioid crisis?
Just to back up to what I just said about sovereignty and self-determination, I firmly believe that every person born, has a right to decide, what the course of their life is. If they want help, it's up to them, but they'll ask. We don't need to impose our beliefs and values and systems on how they be. So what really we try to do is be a cultural justice program. And what I mean by cultural justice, it's where we had a rich, vibrant, powerful culture from coast to coast, and somehow the dominant culture now has subjugated even our own people, their beliefs and customs. So we try to shine the light, and because we work from the principles of equity, the light where it doesn't usually go, into SROs, into the alleys, and places like that, to a very, very deserving population, so.
Okay, thank you. For anybody who has tried to find Sergeant Michael Wheeler on the internet, don't. He's not there. But tough gig. How is the VPD responding to the opioid crisis?
I think we've tried to take we tried to take a non-traditional approach. I think we moved away, or at least we're trying to move away from a lot of traditional policing aspects. We're trying to remove ourselves from strictly enforcement. We're recognizing that this opioid crisis and people dying is a health crisis. It's not a criminal problem. It's not something we're going to arrest our way out of. And we've made some significant policy changes. I touch back to what Mark was talking about when he said people afraid to call because they don't want to get arrested. And we have a policy where we don't even attend overdoses unless someone has died or unless police or fire have asked for our help for their own safety. We don't want people afraid to try and save themselves or save someone else's life because they think they're going to get arrested. That's not the case, and that's something we try and keep communicating to the population, and it is our policy. We do not attend, so please, if you see someone in crisis, call 911. You're not going to get arrested for being in possession of a substance. We have a progressive drug policy, and it specifically states that users, persons that are using opioids, or people that are using drugs, those persons that may be addicted, those aren't people that should be sought out for any type of arrest or charge. Our idea is to target those persons trafficking in the drugs. My section, in particular, we try and target the middle to high-end dealers, the people that are importing fentanyl as best we can. It is like trying to stick a finger in a dam that's about to burst, but those are some of the ways we're responding at this time.
Can you talk about how the VPD is ahead of the curve compared to other cities?
I think the VPD in general, over the last, I'd say, or at least since I got hired, it seems to have been a very progressive department when you looked at traditional law enforcement. I was working in the downtown east side when the Insight was first established. And I remember it involved an entire change of mindset around treating addiction as a healthcare issue and not as a criminal issue. And of course, that takes some time, and it's almost been a generation overturned by now. But I think that's the general sense that most of the membership within the BPD are feeling. I myself could say I've never arrested another person for strictly possession in my entire 16-year career. I think we're also trying to partner with our partner agencies like the Center for Disease Control. We're actively advocating for treatment on demand. We're supporters of opioid replacement therapy, the Crossroads Clinic, where medical grade heroin is provided to those opioid users. We're supporting those programs where traditionally law enforcement hasn't been involved or hasn't or has felt that's contrary to their traditional role. And we're trying to communicate that to our other law enforcement partners throughout the country. And I think, as Sarah knows, I've taken tours of other police agencies to our safe injection site. And I've spoken to city council members from Ontario and other provinces and talked about our approach and how we have to come together, treat it as a healthcare crisis because people are dying. And it's not a problem we're going to be able to wrest our way out of. We have to find alternative methods, and you talked about the bravery to do something different. And I think that's what we're trying to do as a department, and I think as a community as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Erica, I'm curious about the term peer. It's often used, and some people don't still understand what it means. Can you talk to that and how it affects the crisis?
Sure. So what I'd first like to mention as far as peer is some of us really embrace the word peer, some of us don't, because in some contexts it can kind of have still a very much stigmatizing marginalization, kind of lower income in the employment area when we're attached to services. So coming across as a peer could also be a little bit of a negative thing for some people. Again, it's about, I'll go back to what Patrick said about, we'll often say how we want to be, how we want to be referred to. And sometimes peer can be, for me, it's what guides my scope of practice, that's what I lean on as far as like I go into the work that I do, and my position just recently with the Fraser Health Authority is something that I very much like speaks to how I go forward, and also the nature of that many of us know what's best for us, and that a big part of this opioid crisis is the exclusion and marginalization of people due to criminalization, being stigmatized, due to something that's been socially constructed. Also, a lot of misunderstanding around our drug policies and laws and prohibition. So a peer is just someone that has a lived experience component. We see this in recovery communities. We see this with HIV, Hep C. We see this in grassroots domestic violence when women were taking women into their own homes. That's how it started. And it was about having that commonality and being able to, speak to that together and having, even if it was that one thing. And I think that there's a real special scope of practice that peers have with that engagement and understanding and for each other. And so that's a little bit about what a peer means to me. We get caught up in language, again, ask somebody how they want to be referred to, but also note that it can have a negative connotation. And why is it important? I mean, because we're diverse. People who use drugs are diverse people in recovery, all across the spectrum, we're diverse, and that means we need diverse options and choices. And I say choices because I think there's a lack thereof with our system, and equality doesn't necessarily mean equity, and so that's very important to think about when we move forward.
I want to ask the question why you still got the microphone. What's the...
Why? Because I hold it hostage.
What is the impact of this epidemic on you?
The impact on... sorry. I promised I wasn't going to swear the whole time. Epic fail. But you know what? I have a really difficult, and I say this, is having this role is being right by people who use drugs, the families of people that have lost their loved ones. You know, memberships like drug user groups like Kaput, Van Du, and Solid, and like, and I'm going to say this, like my people, like where I feel the safest, where I feel I belong, and making sure that, you know, I speak truth and be able to carry collective voice. It's a really hard job to do because we are diverse. So I can't come up here and speak for youth, and I can't come up here and speak for Indigenous. I can't speak for men, but what I can is I can try to bring the best that I can, that collective voice, because I stay with my people no matter what. I'll never forget where I come from, and who knows if I go there again. And so it's just being true to as many people as I possibly can that are affected by this crisis.
Okay, thank you. Michael, same question. What's the impact of this epidemic on you and your team?
I think I have to speak more to the frontline officers and the paramedics and the firefighters and the peers that are out there saving lives as well. It's difficult, and I think that was pretty well embodied with how Erica was just speaking. You know, as a police officer, you engage, you have relationships with people, and I remember when I was working in the downtown east side, yeah, you know what, we're the enforcers, we're the branch of the four pillars that enforces, and not always the most popular, and that's something I've come to terms with. But you're someone that sees the same people every day. You're someone that may be buying them a coffee or just sitting down, letting them talk to you. Well, maybe you're busy writing a report, they're talking at your car window, and you actually do develop relationships with persons and people down there. And when you are walking down perhaps an alley a day, couple days, a week, a month later, and you see that person now, and they're now there, and they've died of an overdose. Just starting to see the deaths mount up and pile up. And even from my perspective, where now I sit at a desk most of the time, all the reports, police reports of persons who have died because of an opioid overdose comes to my screen, and I'm responsible for sending out that information to our partners at Vancouver Coastal Health. And it's difficult. It's difficult because people shouldn't be dying, and it's something that's preventable. And I think police officers are not used to feeling helpless, and I think right now we're starting to feel pretty helpless until some radical changes are made.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, want to try the same question? Sure.
You know, first of all, I just, you know, if any of our drummers and singers are here, I just like to really acknowledge them.
Yeah.
You know, because they have showed up faithfully, you know, for so many memorials in the last couple of years. I've lost count. You know, we had 3 in one day once, you know, and, you know, so it's, yeah, it has taken a real emotional toll on me. That's another part I need to change the landscape. I've worked on that street for 18 years. You know, I've known hundreds of people who have died, you know, just, you know, so it's, you know, had a profound impact on me, but it also, you know, has lit that passion and fire about what I see as a strength and beauty and power of our culture, and to fight even harder for it, because I know that's what will help our people. That's what's seen us through a previous genocide. That's what will see us through this one.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, same question.
Well, you know, I'm looking at the crew of the Overdose Prevention Society volunteers there, Spike and Mark, and Ronnie and Frederick and Sherry, and I saw Tim and the folks from Kabud and all the people who are out there from Van Du and Insight that are here in the audience that are out there saving lives every day. And yeah, and it's so shocking to see people that, you know, pictures show up every day of people that you know that have passed away, that you could not even believe that they passed away. And last week you were just kind of dealing with the last person who passed away that everybody saw. And it's completely shocking and horrifying and terrible beyond anything that I could even imagine. It's hard to even comprehend that it's happening. And it's just the sadness. It's family members, it's people that you know, it's people from all walks of life, parts of my life. people from all parts of everyone's life. I think mostly if you ask people in this audience to raise their hand if they've been affected by someone dying of an opiate crisis, you probably see a lot of hands up, eh? Yeah. So I mean, a lot of people are affected by this, and it's just just a terrible, terrible thing. It's hard to even comprehend, I would say. But I mean, all I can see is that there's hope in this panel here, where the Vancouver Police Department's here advocating for safe access to opiates. I think that says a lot, and we really need to push that, because that's really what we need. We need to push all levels of government for that, and that's going to be one of the big game changers, I think, for this crisis.
Thank you. In the few minutes that we have left, I'd like to ask each of you, I guess, the same question, and starting with Mark, in terms of what's the solution? What can we do to move this conversation forward?
Wow. I think there is things that we can do, and sometimes we describe this as just so complicated, and what can we do? At the same time, we're always, Mike just used the term, and it's quite common in governments and circles, that every death is preventable. When you look at the situation people are living in, I challenge that sometimes, and in many cases, these deaths are predictable, and we haven't stepped up like we needed to. When I was involved in the late 90s and 2000s dealing with the HIV epidemic, there was a whole bunch of things we were supposed to do that were driving people to this. And the only thing we sort of got right was getting people on antiretroviral therapy. But we knew at that time that this was not about HIV and getting people on drugs. This was about prevention. This was about housing. This was about treating people's trauma. This was about just taking care of people's social needs and not driving people to poverty, making sure we're dealing with people with mental illness issues. And we dropped all that, basically. And that what we're left with in many communities is something that is quite fixable. And so I'm very frustrated sometimes when we're allowed to throw our hands up in the air and say, this is really complicated. It's actually not that complicated. And some of the why the epidemic went from 300 people dying a year to 1,500 people dying last year is not because all of a sudden there was way more people using drugs and way more vulnerable people. It's because through prohibition and criminalization, we drove the market into fentanyl. We created this ourselves, and the other we need to make sure that we differentiate the idea that prescription drugs caused this whole problem, even if they did, which they didn't. It's obviously not the time to pull back those drugs. So we've squeezed a market of many people who were dependent on drugs, but at least were using drugs that they knew the purity and could count on what they were getting, to a hodgepodge of poisons that we're exposing people to. And at the root of it is criminalization and prohibition. And that, to me, is what we need to fix. And even if we got rid of the criminalization part of things, then social and health has to step up and do something. The situation that we're forcing people to live in, the tent cities that are all over the province, and the situation in the downtown east side is fixable. People deserve housing. It's a human right. People deserve medical care. People deserve having some respect. People deserve not being in and out of prison for their lives. So there's really things that we can do. So and it really starts with starting to take notice of people, investing in people, giving them opportunities to use drugs that won't kill them, and taking care of their social problems. So this is not impossible, and that we've really really created some of these problems ourselves through prohibition. And although I think the public expects the police to intercept high-level dealers and bust fentanyl labs. For every bust that we celebrate in the press, that's probably another 50 people who just lost their dealer and are now exposed to even worse drugs. If we were able to eliminate fentanyl tomorrow, that probably wouldn't change the number of people dying because there'd be something else. So this is, we really need to get a totally different mindset here, that we need to recognize that people are dependent on these substances, make sure they have access to substances that aren't killing them, and then move them along in a trajectory of treatment and recovery. But I'm just so frustrated sometimes that we throw up our hands and say it's too complicated, but really it's not that complicated.
Thank you. Sarah, I don't know that Mark left you much, but
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. No.
I would be curious.
No,
his
he really
closing
hasn't.
comments and what do you think?
No. Everything that Mark said, and Crosstown Clinic offers a program to 100 people. It may have expanded to more people now, but they offer safe injectables to people, and they can go in and get their medication every day. And I think that if we expanded that to 1,000 people, I think we'd be, getting somewhere for people. I've seen, people getting access to safe heroin programs or safe hydromorph programs actually completely do amazing in their lives. They don't have to go get drugs off the street. They don't have to break into cars. They don't have to do survival sex trade. They don't have to go and deal with, gangstery type dealers that are terrible to them, and they have to do awful things to get these drugs. They go to a medical professional, or they could even come to someone like me. I have a med management certificate, so I'm able to give out medication. We could do it at our overdose prevention site. We could give out medication to people, and instead of them taking something that has fentanyl in it that could kill them and that we'd had to call the ambulance, 911, everything could change. It's a game changer, and I think all the frontline workers that I know, fire department, even the city of Vancouver, everybody knows that this is the change that needs to happen. It's just a matter of the political will at all levels of government, just saying, okay, you know what, we've done this other way. We've tried to arrest our way out of this. We've tried to do all of these different things. Now it's time for us to really do what's going to really work, and it is going to take some bravery. But I think, if any time, it would be now that we're ready for it. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, closing comments and thoughts and heart.
I'll just tie up what Mark was saying, and a metaphor I always use. I say that, if you think of our healthcare system as a canoe, it's kind of like gotten big and waterlogged and slow and ponderous to move. Our elders, they would have beached that, say, no, that's not getting us where we need to go anymore. We need to build a new, sleek, fast one, that really serves the people well. So that's what I always strive for. And just to touch on what Sarah's saying, my 3 littlest kids, their names are Bravery, Honor, and Journey. And so I'm going to say, we're going to have to be very brave, on this journey together, and to very much honor the people who, have been lost through this crisis. Their sacrifice and what their families sacrifice. We have to work really hard, to make sure that doesn't happen to other families. So, talk to you soon.
Thank you. Michael?
You guys didn't really leave much at all, did you? All I can say is I'm a cop. I've been a cop for 16 years, and I am on board with everything that this panel is saying, and that is becoming the mindset of my entire department. And you talk about, is there time for changes now? It is. And obviously, if you can get those who are tasked with the enforcement to believe that there's got to be a better way, there is a better way, and let's go down that path, well, that's a pretty big barrier, I think, that's come down there. And I think it just takes, the next step is for those other levels to start falling in line and start coming to a realization that, yeah, something new has to be done.
Okay, thank you. Erica? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's all good. I just want to add to, we talk about bravery. think it's a time for humility, which means to be teachable and remain teachable, and to admit where things haven't worked, to add on to what everybody said here, and the fact that we really need to shift. Like, to me, the way that we view people who use substances has been socially constructed, and to me that means it can be deconstructed, and that we need not to continue this discourse of disposal for people and have this undeserving and deserving element in distaste in our mouths for people who use drugs, and to start educating around that. And we can take it from everything that's come here around prohibition and why drug policy has been put in place in the first place, and what's behind that, because it certainly never had to do with our health. And so I'd like to leave it at that, and just really building our communities back together, which means that, again, back to this inclusiveness. And if you want to find out what works for us, ask us.
Good point. Thank you. We have a few online questions, but I'm just curious if anybody here, we're going to have wandering microphones. Yes, I see a hand up in the middle. I see two. It's really hard to see here.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering what we can do as a community to help push our government and stuff to get this stuff to happen faster for the stuff that you're talking about. Yeah.
Great question. Do you want to direct that to anyone of our panel in particular, or?
No,
Okay.
anybody.
Who wants to grab that? Okay. We have lots of
So I'm probably closest as far as the panel members. I'm maybe farthest from the street, but closest to the government. I'm the deputy provincial health officer, and I think the political environment right now, both federally, provincially, and in some case locally, is really open, like they've never been open before. And as I said at the beginning, a lot of the ideas and the changes we want to make, the political will is, well, I'm not sure the people are ready for this, and so I think the people need to be educated and be ready for this. And I think that the local communities can do a lot to push the agenda forward, and that means getting out there and talking to politicians and policymakers that we're this is not working for us anymore, and you need to embrace change. So I think you can play a big role.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. I just take it your time a little bit, and also I have questions, and also I introduce myself. I just new incoming in Canada. I'm from Afghanistan. Like about 10 months, I'm now in Canada. And first, I want to say the situations here, in especially downtown, who is a lot of people who is smoking and take drugs. When I see this, I become wonderful. And I'm saying like here, why they get it from where, who dealing this? Why not stop those people who do business of this kind of things in dealing? And the second one I want to say, like last year's we have a trip in Holland, and I go there, was writing at a shop, and they was writing ashes from Afghanistan. And I told two guys, let's go to there. And when we go there, and we see they show us so many kind of ashes. And then I say, okay, show me that one. When they show that one, and they say, yeah, this is from Afghanistan. I say, where you can get it? These are. They say, yeah, we buying. I say, who's selling these are? And then I told him, okay, if we wanted to selling, how we import it here to Holland? And the guy said, did you have? I just joke, and I say, yes, we have in Helmand provinces, which is one of the provinces of Afghanistan with a lot of poppies introduced there. And they say, yeah, sure, how many kg you have? I just told him it's like 2,000 kg. They said, don't worry, just we will dealing here, and from the base, the collation force is based from Holland, and they will contact you, they will come there, and they will take the goods, and that's your responsibility, just selling them, and they will import it here. And I become wonderful and say, what is this? You know, the base is coming, the government force is coming, and they buying, and they sending back to Holland in Europe and rest of the another Europe. And when I'm see here and I asking so many people in downtown, where you buy these drugs, and they say some car is coming and they divided these are, and we're buying. All these people is involved in that. And when I saw those people, and I become wonderful, and I'm say, why the government not stop the big dealers, not a small, just the big dealers who deal this and who imported this and who's selling this. When you stop those people, and then the later will be also stop it. And this is my questions. The government has a policy to stop those are who dealing these are. That is my question.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
I'll field that one. It's no, your
No,
English was
perfect.
fine, no problem at all, sir. Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada is one of the greatest documents I think that we have, and it enshrines our rights as Canadians. And what it does is it puts limits on what the government and traditionally what the police can do to investigate. And you talk about why can't we go after the head dealers? Well, they often don't wear signs saying I am the #1 dealer of fentanyl, and I'm not being facetious. What I'm trying to say is they're very well insulated, the people that are doing the importation. The importation is relatively simple because it takes such a finite amount to turn such an incredible profit. And it's just beyond the capacity of the government or the postal inspectors to catch these finite amounts that can come in. It's not like cocaine where you have to mail it in and say a brick of cocaine or a significant amount. You're talking about very, very small amount that you can send in a letter that can make someone, the recipient who's going to turn around and sell that, makes them thousands of dollars. There's a proliferation of dealers out there. We're not targeting the dealers on the street. We may target the mid-level, and we do try and target the high-level traffickers, but unfortunately, and I think Mark spoke to this, for every one that maybe we arrest and take out, it takes an incredible amount of resources to get persons established in probably a criminal organization that are that well entrenched, that well insulated. You're looking likely at millions of dollars and tens of thousands of man hours or person hours in order to make an operation like that happen. And the capacity for our courts to handle the gigantic mega trials of these organizations that may be behind this. And so it's a real dilemma. And I don't think it's a problem that can be solved by arresting. We are selective in those persons that are committing violence, those persons responsible for murders, or if it's very clear to us and we can identify a person who's importing or dealing significant quantities of fentanyl, we will target them. But unfortunately, there's a proliferation of them, and we just simply don't have the resources, the manpower, or the laws in place that would allow us to aggressively go after them.
Is it a budget issue?
Yes and no, because I think even if we had a limitless budget, we don't have limitless man hours.
Okay.
We don't have limitless human resources to rely upon. I can't work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week like everyone here. We all have families, whether we have children or whether we just have mom, dad, whomever.
Yeah.
We have personal lives, and we can't dedicate that kind of time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just one
Mark?
quick comment. I just suggest that you watch Narcos on Netflix and find out what happens when you go after those people. So that is a non-starter for the most part. And the other real principle is this is demand-driven epidemic, not a supply-driven epidemic. When you see the extent that people will go to get drugs, the drugs will get there. So there is no hope that we'll ever be able to touch this by stopping drugs from coming into our country.
Thanks, Mark. We have
Hi.
one more question.
Hello, my name is Paula. I've been a user in the downtown east side. I'm up here, and my question is, like you said, you weren't criminalizing the dealers on the street, but being an ex-person of that street, I can say that I've watched people go through drug court, and I've watched, I hate to say it, but kind of a racism on people who get charged and people who get to walk. and being First Nation, I've watched a lot of my brothers and sisters go to jail for the small time dealing when they could have done something different for them. And I've watched other people get drug court and native court and still slip through the system and end up dying. And so my question is like, what's the VPD doing to help those people rather than, you said you're not criminalizing, but are you giving them the information to get help?
Good question.
I think it's fair. I think we're doing our best. Again, we're not people. Traditionally, police aren't people that who are users of drugs tend to confide in or want to go speak to about that. I think we're trying to break down the barriers, and I'm certainly not saying it's solved. We have a policy. We're caught in a little bit of a difficult situation because we are tasked with enforcing the laws. We don't get to necessarily pick and choose. However, we do have a wide range of discretion. I don't have control. I'm not the overseer of the officers on the beat. I can speak to my own personal experience. I can speak to what I traditionally see. That targeting users to be perfectly frank, it's a waste of time in police terms. Why? There's no purpose behind it. Dealers sometimes, even street level, yes. Arrests sometimes are made. Again, that's what we're tasked with, and until that mandate kind of changes, that'll likely continue to happen, but to what extent? And I would suggest from when I first started, when there were what they called roundup style busts in the 100 East Hastings, where you'd see 20, 30 people arrested at once, that simply isn't happening anymore. And I think anyone who's down there can probably attest you're not seeing those, whoever's been around for that long. No, the bust though, the arrest charges, people going to court and
there has been I will say that there has been a bit of a street sweep going on. I think Patrick maybe could speak to this as well, but where there has been some, and I think it's over now. It's been for a month, but there has been a lot of police activity and a lot of small-time drug dealers and drugs taken away in the past month. So I think that it's good to hear from you that that's not a path that the Vancouver Police Department is wanting to continue to go down in the future, because it's really not the way forward, I don't think.
I want to, this is really important that we talk about this too. I really think that we need to understand that 5 times more likely are Indigenous people to overdose, 3 times more likely to die. I can only speak around our Federal Institution for Women, because that's what I'm involved with FEI. But right now we're sitting at 50% are Indigenous women in our prison system. So I think that we absolutely need to talk about that. And you're absolutely right that we do not have right connections and supports for people, and they're disproportionately overrepresented across the board with all of these issues. It's another piece that I want to talk about is these syndemic approaches that need to be done. We jump crisis to crisis, and that we know that we can be coming together as a community and making sure that we take more of these holistic approach. So now we're on the overdose crisis while we have to worry about Hep C and HIV again when it's going to come back over here, and we keep doing this, and we need to shift that as well. But thank you for bringing that up, because it's very important that we speak to that. We speak the truth.
Yeah. We have one more question.
Actually, I just want to touch up on that. That's okay. I got the mic. We have to be able to acknowledge that systemic racism is alive and well in every institution in Canada. If we cannot name that, where do we start from? And we also have to say that, the 150-year reign of terror that men have imposed, through colonial systems, we have to get ourselves out of the way of that too. For me to sit here and be authentic and say, I'm leading, a cultural movement, that's not, that doesn't jibe with me, because I'm a male, and our culture is based in, the drum comes from a woman, the pipe comes from a woman, many of our ceremonies, it's all we have to rematriate and return women to the center of power because, we've done a terrible job.
Absolutely. One more question.
Hi, I'm Frederick Williams. I'm with the Ops Group, and I think I speak on behalf of all the peers. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all of your support and guidance and strength. That being said, the peers have a lot of gain a lot of trust with the people that are high risk. My question is, what are the chances of having the peers step a little bit further into the limelight and give them the opportunity to help and guide these people to better situations? I think it's just a way that, because we have a one-to-one relationship with them, and I think it's time that maybe we have a chance to maybe guide them the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
And actually, maybe a panel for the future can be, of the workers that are on the front lines every day saving lives, and because Frederick and Spike and Mark and all of the folks that are here saving lives have
A lot to teach us.
a lot to teach us, and a lot, they a lot of really lived experience, and I agree with them.
Yeah, good question. Really good question. I'm going to encourage us. Go ahead. No.
We have time. I think that we're really pushing for this, and I'm just going to give you an example. Again, coming from Fraser Health, that's who I just started working for about 3 months. I worked in community. I was doing work barely. How do I transitioning into helping my community from a volunteer perspective with helping women, marginalized women like myself at the time, grew into a position where I ended up working. I started volunteering. I was employed. How I've taken life and fought, scratched, and crawled my way into a place where I could be of service to people that I cared about and loved. And then to the point where I saw this big shift, where it was the Fraser Health Authority that actually had a position that I actually thought, it's coming. I think that peers across the board should be employed and valued, supported, and in these positions, and which is what we're trying to move to, which is the big reason why I took this job, because that's what, to me, is my mission, is to see that we have drug user networks and groups that I want to see funded, that hopefully will be supporting in a place of employment and being able to match your expertise with a good fit and have the supports around it, because that's really important too, not to have tokenistic behaviors being done to people, and to make sure that we're all in this together and that we're able to have that collective voice. And I think it's moving, because that's what I'm pushing for. That's why I took the job.
Thank you. We have
One of my
one more.
favorite, I was cutting you off, sorry.
All right.
One of my favorite quotes, and I think it's applicable, is that it's a Cheyenne quote, and it says, "A nation can only move as fast as its slowest member. Real leaders lead from behind." So I think that's really applicable, when it comes to peers.
And I want to say that the leaders that we have are, like Patrick said, are you guys, and also the best people in the overdose crisis by far to deal with the crisis have been the workers, the volunteers, the peers. They've been there helping at all times, and we couldn't have saved as many lives without them. So they're the ones.
Once you do
One other quick comment, that I think this ties directly into decriminalization. So it's very difficult to engage people and give them a voice if they're have to live in hiding and doing crime to support their drug habits. So it's really tied closely into empowering people and not criminalizing them. So we're putting people in an impossible situation to ask them to step forward and be leaders in this, and the society's saying that you're a criminal. And so to me, that's a huge step forward if we can change that.
Thanks.
In recovery are called anonymous people for a reason, right? And it's many of us that are dying and that are vulnerable and marginalized don't really have that protection of being indoors and hiding. So most of us are exposed. But I mean, we see this, the stigma follows no matter where on the continuum you fall when it comes to substance use. My worth as a human being is determined on the substances I put in my body, and it had been for years.
Thank you. Joanne, do we have time for one more? Okay.
Hi, I guess this is a question specifically for Mike. But the question is, how are we going to work with our correctional centers to really make sure that what we're doing there also is going to help someone who's getting out? Because, you know, someone could go into corrections, they get methadone, it really helps them, and then they get out and maybe they go into relapse. So is there something we're doing there to work with them so they don't also go back into relapse and start using opioids again, or, you know, overdose again?
I can do my best. Sorry, where are you? I can hear you, but I couldn't see. Oh, there we go. Okay, okay. I don't have a lot of connection with the corrections branch. What I can say is that's going to have to come from from probably both the provincial and even a federal level, because the corrections are divided both provincially and federally. I think it's a conversation to be had. I think if there's going to be this kind of support and this kind of change outside of the correctional institutions, I think that same support is going to need to be in place in the correctional institutions in order to meet the goal of rehabilitation, right? I think if someone's in there and all of a sudden they're going through their sickness because they're not getting their opiates or not getting their what they're using, you're just putting up more walls. And how we're going to come to that, I don't have an answer for that, but I do think that's a very good question, and I think it's certainly something that's going to need to be addressed if we're going to take this approach, and someone's going to be brave enough for it to happen out here. It's got to happen in there as well, and that could, I think we could see a lot of changeover in crime if we start taking this approach.
There is a real focus on this transition thing. I mean, it's ridiculous that we'd send people out after a time in incarceration with a bus ticket, and that's it. And often their welfare's been discontinued, their MSP coverage, and we put people in an unbelievably unsafe situation. The risk of dying after coming out of incarceration is very high. So it's we have statistics showing that a large number of overdose deaths happen in people who've just been recently released from incarceration, where they've detoxed themselves and then come out and use drugs and overdose. So we do a terrible job at that right now, and that really needs to be a huge emphasis, that anybody leaving corrections has a place to go, has immediate medical care, has their welfare reinstated right away, and we take care of them, because we are creating ourselves impossible situations for people. So I think that's a key thing that we could really improve on tomorrow.
Erica, final comment.
Last comment. Final comment, because now I'm getting warmed up, because we're talking about things that I'm really like to talk about. So, so there are certain things that I mean very quietly, and I've noticed that in some systems, you know, I tiptoe around people's egos, and sometimes it's finding the right person in the right place. But in Abbotsford, I was able to connect with a police officer that did, you know, I really liked his style of policing, because he really tried to connect, and he did a little bit things like differently what I would call community policing. And I said, you know, this whole city cell thing, like if you have somebody who's, you know, goes in that's you know, going through acute withdrawal from alcoholism, you have a protocol usually, and it's to go to emerge, right? If somebody, because you can die from detoxing from alcohol, we know this, right? And so if somebody's sick enough getting DTs or anything like that, and I said, but can we have like a release from cells protocol, or in court cells as well, where somebody is instantly given the offer to hook up with OAT? Why can't we get some of our docs to go in when we know when, trust me, I spent 7 days, it was unheard. It's like, it basically should be cruel and unusual punishment in city cells in Kelowna, where I literally was left 7 days. That's even unheard of. You don't leave somebody in city cells for 7 days. I went through that, and I was extremely dope sick. They wouldn't even give me a Tums on day 3 when my throat had swollen so much from vomiting. And I talk about this. You know when somebody's sick as an officer, and you're watching somebody go through acute withdraw over a long weekend, and sending somebody out in that state is criminal, and also now negligible, because we know that you can die, literally die from that, with our tolerance impacted, and also the vulnerability of being in withdrawal and not being able to make the decisions that we normally might make, safe choices wise. But being able to intervene, go into your community and start advocating for that. Talk to your local police department, start these initiatives. All it was a conversation, and letting that officer, because he knows how to navigate, and this is what I mean by egos aside. I'm not going to tell him how to do his job, but I'll give him an idea and say, hey, I'll support you with this. What do you think? And allowing, like, again, finding the right person in the right place. You know, they know where to take it to amongst their system and structure. There's a whole way to do things, but you can do that on a local community level. And, you know, and talk to people. Where are the gaps? Where can I go? I mean, we become allies with people. You don't have to use drugs to help. You know, you talk to people, you get out there and try to be part of the solution. And where can you advocate on a local level, and then higher up? Anyways,
No, you're great.
All yours.
But you were so shy when we first met tonight.
I have a slow twitch motor.
Yeah, I think the encouraging thing for me is where we started, and that was with a lot of heart, and each of you care very much because you're here, and I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel, because you have been terrific. Each of you brought your hearts tonight, which is all we can ask. And you know, I don't know that we've solved the problem tonight. I know we haven't, but we've started a good conversation, and I hope you will carry this conversation forward. Joanne, thank you for having us. You want us to go downstairs now? Excellent. So let's go downstairs and have another conversation. Thank you.